Welcome to the People Performance Podcast, where we discuss all things people performance. The People Performance Podcast is made up of 3 series. First up, we have the Leader Lounge episodes with founder of T2, Martin Johnson. Then we have the guest interview episodes. And finally, we have our performance episodes delivered by our very own T2 consultants. If you've listened to our podcast and you want to get in touch and find out a little bit more about what we do or how we can help and support you, reach out via help@trans2performance.com. You can stream and listen to our podcast on all available platforms. So for now, sit back, tune in and enjoy the People Performance Podcast.
So welcome to the People Performance Podcast with me, Martin Johnson, and another Leader Lounge episode where I talk about a subject matter for around 10 to 15 minutes, just to sow the seed on something that might be interesting or make you think, or might be important to your own personal development. This episode, we're going to talk about cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. So, cognitive dissonance, and I'll start by reading the definition, just so we start off on the accurate front foot. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort experienced when a person holds 2 or more conflicting beliefs, ideas, or values, or when their actions contradict their beliefs. It's a psychological tension between knowing that something isn't quite right or is not going to serve you well and doing it anyway. So cognitive dissonance can feel uncomfortable for people. It's where you are uncomfortable with something to the point at which avoidance or the desire for avoidance is strong. An example of this might be smoking. As an example, we all know that smoking is bad for us and can kill us, but we do it anyway. The cognitive dissonance in that is a contradiction between the knowledge and understanding of what this is doing to me versus the desire to do it anyway. And there's a million other examples of cognitive dissonance in our lives, from when we fall out with a family member and have an argument. Maybe we've been in the wrong. Maybe we've acted in a way which is not in line with our value system. However, admitting that we was wrong is very, very uncomfortable for us. And so the cognitive dissonance is that mental discomfort that we experience when our actions do not match our value systems and beliefs. So let me read confirmation bias in terms of its definition. Confirmation bias is slightly different, but they're fundamentally linked, and it's linked to cognitive dissonance. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret and recall information in a way that confirms your pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses, whilst ignoring or downplaying any contradictory evidence. So confirmation bias, we've spoken a lot about this at T2 in the past. This is the process you go through where you start to predefine an outcome or a conclusion on a situation. And then what you will do is you will go forward, and any information that comes to light that suggests you are wrong, any information or evidence that says, actually, you might not have this right, instead of acknowledging that and challenging your beliefs, you will reframe that evidence or search for other opposing evidence to back up your narrative. So confirmation bias is where you're looking for anything that supports your narrative, and you're actually going to reframe or push away anything that doesn't. And so it can be quite a dangerous thing for us, can confirmation bias, and we all experience this. We all have examples of where we apply confirmation bias in our work, in our relationships, and in our life. But it's fundamentally where you stop challenging beliefs and you stop asking the questions around, am I right? And instead you search for everything that's going to back up and confirm that your narrative, your version of events is correct. So that's confirmation bias. So if we summarize those two, confirmation bias is that tension between a belief and an action. It's knowing something isn't good for you or serving you well, or it doesn't align with your value system, but you do it anyway. That's cognitive dissonance. Confirmation bias is then the process of trying to justify why you did that in the first place. The two are linked. Confirmation bias is the strategy for dealing with cognitive dissonance. So if anyone's listening to this, and I'll give you an example, if you've had an argument with a friend or fallen out with somebody or had a conflict or a disagreement with a family member, whatever it might be, and you was the instigator in that, in fact, it was some of your behaviors and actions that caused that. That creates cognitive dissonance because deep down, if we really reflected, we may come to the conclusion that we was wrong. But that's a really hard thing for people to admit sometimes. And everybody's slightly different with this, and some people are more stubborn with it than others, but it's a really hard thing for us to acknowledge. So in order to avoid that really uncomfortable situation of saying, it was me, I am in the wrong, confirmation bias is the strategy you will use to try and not confront that reality and instead try to find evidence as to why your version of events is correct. Now, can you imagine when two human beings in conflict are both experience cognitive dissonance, they both act in a way which is not in line with their beliefs and ideals, because we're all human and that happens, and then both parties apply confirmation bias in terms of one is trying to justify their version of events and their narrative, and the other is doing the same. And we stretch so far from what the truth is and the reality of the situation is that quite often there's no coming back. I often say on podcasts and in things we're talking about at the moment, polarization in society is a problem. It's a problem driven by social media, driven by propaganda, and driven by agendas. Because if you think about what I'm saying now, confirmation bias gets stronger when information is presented that reinforces your beliefs and narratives, even if they're not true or accurate. And so after so long, there's the old adage of, if you lie so much about something, you actually believe it's true. It's probably because confirmation bias has been in play for so long that actually you've gathered so much data evidence, or you've programmed yourself with a version of events and thoughts so much that it's actually your reality. And so in psychology, cognitive dissonance is the originator of all this happens. It's when something happens in our world where deep down in our subconscious, we know it's wrong, or we know it's not good for us, or we know we caused that, or whatever it might be. But the actions you have taken are the polar opposite and different. So it creates this cognitive dissonance. Then confirmation bias becomes the strategy for dealing with that. Because the alternative to confirmation bias is you face up to reality. You admit you're wrong. You put your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs in the middle of a table, and you challenge the hell out of them. And you say, am I right? And if the answer to that is no, what's got to follow up from that is an admission, an apology, right? Some accountability, some ownership, and some vulnerability. And that is the most difficult thing in the world at times for a human being to do, especially if the stakes are high in the situation, like your reputation is on the line at work, or it's a deep-seated ongoing feud with a family member, and it's gone so far that the thought of even backing down and saying you are wrong, just terrifies the life out of you. So confirmation bias becomes the easiest option in that scenario. So they are linked, but I would say confirmation bias, if you think about it, is the strategy for dealing with cognitive dissonance. So what are your options? Well, your options are to allow confirmation bias to kick in and go down that road and fight the fight. And there's plenty of people listening to this who are probably in situations where that's been going on for some time now, and you think, well, there's maybe no going back now. If you've ever met anybody who's put their flag in the sand for so long and that it's so entrenched, almost lifting that out of the soil and waving it is not an option anymore. It's just not an option anymore. So confirmation bias can be difficult to overcome, not insurmountable. But there is another option. We talk here at T2 about open versus closed loop thinking, and it's the easiest way I could create a little simple model that would allow us to understand when cognitive dissonance is happening and when we're about to head down a road of confirmation bias. So what is that? Closed loop thinking is very much confirmation bias. So that's where you predetermine the outcome to this situation. This is what I believe. This is my thought process, my position on this. And then you close off the loop. And then you set round on your journey of going through this loop, and any information that comes your way that says you're wrong, you're going to reframe, or you're going to find opposing evidence to suit your narrative, so you can arrive at the end of the loop and go, see, I told you so. That's closed loop thinking. So open loop thinking is the strategy. Open loop thinking is this notion where you don't predetermine the outcome. You don't fix your views too early. You say, I feel this about this situation. I think this is the reality, or I think this is what I believe. But am I right? You ask yourself that question instantly in open loop thinking, but am I right here? Because if you ask that question, you're opening yourself up to say, well, maybe no, maybe I'm not. And that's a wonderful position to start with, because then we can go on our journey of this open, constant open loop where we can go around and say, right, let me look for facts and evidence. Let me reflect on this. Let me get another person's point of view. Let me sit down with this person and see where they're coming from and what their experience of this is. Let me actually put this in the middle and challenge it. The reason open loop thinking is really positive is because it stops natural confirmation bias from happening. It just pauses it, it freezes it, because you go on a journey of discovery. You go on the mission of discovery to find out what the truth might look like. What often happens with open loop thinking is you ask a load of questions, good quality questions, and you're open to potential answers. Why that is important is because when you get those answers, that has the power to change your perception. That will then lead to opportunities, which leads to actions, which leads to decisions, which means that actually you can end up in a much more balanced and different position. So in order to counteract the natural, and I'll be honest, if you think about how we're wired and everything we talk about here with the humanistic core functions of our experience being survival, reproduction, and purpose. It's the survival mechanism that is causing cognitive dissonance and therefore confirmation bias. It's our brain's ability to protect us at all costs, right? That causes this natural evolutionary reaction. So if we want to counteract that, we've got to fight against some pretty, deep-seated and ingrained, powerful brain function. So we've got to do something different. And open loop thinking gives us the opportunity to do that. It's going to take some effort. It's going to take some vulnerability. It's going to take some strength. But to be able to say, I feel so strongly about this, but am I right, is one of the most powerful things a human being can do. If you think about it, it's not just about conflict, arguments, reputation, decisions. It can be about your worldview. It can be about the polarized topics of society, whether it's religion versus science. I believe this, but am I right? Because if I go, I believe this, and I go off down a road of confirmation bias, I'm just going to find every reason as to why I'm right. You see this on social media where someone feels so powerful about something, they will only share the videos and the content that supports the narrative. You very rarely see them sharing anything of the opposing view and giving it an opportunity or a chance. And so if we're going to avoid this, we have to take action. And I guess to put it into simple language, to summarize this, I guess this is what we're talking about when we talk about stubbornness. Stubborn people, we're all stubborn to an extent. Stubbornness occurs from this very thing we are talking about now, this juxtaposition of cognitive dissonance that says we are acting and behaving in a certain way, or we have acted and behaved in a certain way, and it's making us feel uncomfortable because it's opposing our natural beliefs and values. However, the chimp brain wants to protect you, and therefore admitting you are wrong is high stakes. It carries consequence, and therefore it's the harder path to tread. So confirmation bias is the strategy you will use to not have to walk that walk, to not have to go down that road. Confirmation bias will kick in because it's easier to stay in your lane, reinforce your narrative, find ways to say you are right rather than admit you are wrong. And so open loop thinking is something that can be practiced, and it's something that the more self-aware people do. And it has the ability to end arguments, end conflicts, bring people together, but most importantly, it has the ability to seek the truth. Because the funny thing about the truth is, it ain't going anywhere. It's a really good point about external influence when it comes to this phenomenon of cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias, because not only are we as individuals wired to do that, to self-preserve and protect our reputations and our standpoints and our views, but outside influence can also supercharge and fuel cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. Because, quite often you'll talk to a friend or a colleague and you will explain a scenario or a story or a chain of events, but don't forget, to that friend or colleague, you are giving them your chain of events, your narrative, your perception of the truth. And so that friend or colleague will absolutely back you up. Oh my God, I can't believe this. You are in the right, they are in the wrong. That must be awful. And it deepens your confirmation bias because you go, yes, this person agrees with me, so I must be right. And actually, you'll find people in life where they will actively seek out the right people to speak to. So people are very clever at going, who thinks like me, who has the same worldview as me, and who is likely to be 100% on my side in this scenario. I will go and seek them out because I will get what I need from them. That in itself is an act of confirmation bias, because you're never going to go to somebody who's going to challenge you. The friend or the family member who always plays devil's advocate, who always takes the other person's point of view, who always tries to get you to look at it through a different lens. You won't go to them, or very rarely will you, because that's uncomfortable, right? And that's not going to do anything for your confirmation bias. So outside influences can absolutely supercharge your thought process, as can social media and propaganda and information and data that supports your narrative as well. So it's a really good point to make, because my view on that would be, if you are in a position where you are experiencing cognitive dissonance, the best strategy you can do is to seek out people who have a polar opposite view to yourself, or to seek out the people who think differently to you in situations like this. Arguably, the worst strategy is to seek out people who think the same as you and who are likely to hold deep-seated beliefs and values and worldview elements like you do, because all you will seek to do in that situation is reinforce your confirmation bias. So quite often, the more uncomfortable conversations are the ones that are the most fruitful. So hopefully this is a short, sharp Leader Lounge episode that's focused on cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. Hopefully there's a few things in there that you'll take away in terms of how you think in situations. how much confirmation bias you get drawn into. And more so, what are your strategies when this happens? You may even be watching this and you can think of examples right here and now where you're in the middle of this, right? If this gives you a few moments and an opportunity to think and reflect and do something differently, I think that would be a positive thing. So hopefully it's been helpful, and we will be back again shortly with another Leader Lounge episode.
The Leader Lounge with Martin Johnson, brought to you by T2.